At 32, my life was a beige blur. I was Anya, a woman who blended seamlessly into the background, lost in the labyrinth of a corporate jungle. My days were spent staring at spreadsheets, my lunch breaks were solitary affairs with a sad desk salad, and my dating life was as exciting as a blank sheet of paper. I was the queen of beige. From my clothes to my hair, even my personality seemed to have adopted the monotonous hue. One day, my cubicle neighbor Fiona swiveled her chair towards me, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "Guess what?" she whispered, her voice a conspiratorial hiss. "There's a guy who's interested in you." My head shot up, a startled gazelle caught in the headlights. Fiona, ever the purveyor of office gossip, continued, "He sees you all the time at that little French cafe you like." My mind reeled. Someone had noticed me. At my weekly escape, where I nursed overpriced lattes and daydreamed of rom-com scenarios? "Who? How?" I stammered, utterly bewildered. Fiona shrugged. "He's a bit shy, but he's been watching you." The following Friday, armed with Fiona's intel, I found myself at the cafe, a knot of anticipation twisting in my stomach. Just as I was about to give up hope, he walked in. Tall, with tousled dark hair and an air of quiet confidence, his eyes met mine across the room. He walked straight towards me, a playful smirk softening into a genuine smile. "Hey," I managed, my voice a shaky mess. "Hey there," he replied, his voice warm and reassuring. "You're the girl from the corner table, right? I see you here all the time." We exchanged a few words, the initial awkwardness melting away with each shared sentence. Soon, he was asking me to join him for coffee elsewhere. Excited and slightly terrified, I agreed. That Saturday, he took me to a record store downtown. It was a haven for music lovers, crammed with vinyl from every era and genre. His name, I learned, was Daniel. He navigated the aisles with the ease of a seasoned explorer, his passion for music evident in every word as he pulled out albums and shared their stories. He handed me a Miles Davis record. "An absolute masterpiece," he declared. I listened, intrigued, as he talked about the music. I felt a pang of insecurity. Jazz wasn't exactly my forte. Sensing my hesitation, he chuckled. "No worries, everyone starts somewhere. Maybe I can introduce you to the good stuff." Hours melted away in a flurry of music trivia and shared laughter. I discovered that beneath his cool exterior, Daniel was a bit of a goofball. He cracked terrible jokes and quoted lines from cheesy 80s movies with an earnestness that had me in stitches. As we strolled back to my car, a comfortable silence settled between us. It was clear this wasn't just a casual coffee date. There was a spark, a connection that went beyond shared interests and witty banter. Then, on a rainy Tuesday evening, Daniel surprised me with a fancy dinner date. It took an unexpected turn when he knelt before me, a simple yet elegant diamond necklace in his hand. Tears welled up in my eyes as I accepted his proposal. "Marry me, Anya," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "and let's paint our lives with every color imaginable." Weeks later, Daniel suggested I meet his parents. Nerves fluttered in my stomach, but his reassuring grip calmed me. "Don't worry," he whispered. "They'll love you." His parents, Sarah and Ben, welcomed me with open arms into their cozy suburban home. Sarah's warm embrace and Ben's firm handshake instantly made me feel like I belonged. The evening was filled with laughter and engaging conversations, leaving me with a sense of belonging I hadn't expected. As Daniel and I drove back to my place, he playfully asked, "So, when do you think we should make this official?" "How about next summer?" I replied, my laughter light and carefree. "Sounds perfect, Mrs. Anya Thompson," he grinned. "That has a nice ring to it, doesn't it?" Our wedding was a small, intimate affair. My father, a successful businessman, beamed with pride as he walked me down the aisle. I wore a simple yet elegant dress, a reflection of the newfound confidence and joy that filled me. That evening, I posted a picture of myself in my wedding dress with the caption, "Happily ever after begins." Married life was pure bliss. Sweet moments, romantic getaways planned by Daniel, cozy evenings spent watching Netflix. Life was a beautiful, harmonious melody. Then, Daniel suggested a change, moving in with his parents. He looked worried as he explained, "They're getting older, Anya. They could use our help around the house." His concern for his parents was genuine, and I understood his close bond with them. Having grown fond of Sarah and Ben myself, I readily agreed. They greeted us with warm smiles and freshly baked cookies, the house instantly feeling brighter with our presence. A few weeks into our stay, a Sunday dinner conversation took an unexpected turn. We were discussing the house's deteriorating condition, the patchwork roof, the peeling paint, the questionable electrical wiring. "Don't worry, Dad," Daniel reassured, helping himself to more mashed potatoes. "We'll get it all sorted." I shot him a worried look. Our savings weren't exactly overflowing, but the thought of his parents living in such a state was unsettling. Sarah, overcome with emotion, started to cry. "Oh, Daniel, you shouldn't have to worry about this," she sobbed. "This old house has seen better days, but we don't want to burden you." The guilt in her voice was palpable. They were such kind-hearted people, and the thought of them struggling in these conditions was heartbreaking. Later that night, tucked into bed, I broached the topic of the house repairs. "Maybe we could use some of our savings," I suggested tentatively. Daniel's face lit up. "Bingo! Those leaky pipes aren't going to fix themselves." We agreed to share the renovation costs, feeling like responsible adults stepping up to the challenge. The following weeks were a whirlwind of contractors, paint samples, and endless trips to the home improvement store. Sarah and Ben couldn't thank us enough, their gratitude radiating as the house transformed from drab to delightful. 7 months later, the house was unrecognizable. Shiny new appliances gleamed in the kitchen, a leak-proof roof replaced the old patchwork one, and the interior was completely refreshed. They even threw a celebratory party, complete with a lavish spread. However, amidst the festivities, Sarah burst into tears. I rushed to her side, anxiety gripping my heart. "What's wrong, Sarah?" I asked, dabbing at her running mascara. "Oh, honey," she sniffled, gripping my hand. "We're so happy with the house, but—" Her voice trailed off, glancing towards Ben and Daniel, who mumbled an excuse and stepped outside. "But what, Sarah?" I urged gently, taking a deep breath, her eyes filled with tears again. "We might lose the house, honey." "They're going to take it away." My stomach plummeted. "Lose the house? After all this work? Why? What happened?" Sarah glanced towards the doorway where the men had disappeared. "We took a big loan, a huge one, to fix up the place, and now it's due," she whispered, her voice heavy with worry. "How much?" $350,000, honey," she sighed. "And we have to pay it back in the next 3 months." The news hit me like a blizzard in July. They had mentioned taking out a loan, but this was a different beast altogether. Confusion battled with a rising tide of anger and worry as I struggled to grasp the magnitude of the situation. The joy of the evening evaporated, replaced by the looming shadow of a financial crisis. It dawned on me then, with chilling clarity, that Sarah and Ben had accumulated a mountain of debt, keeping it all hidden, and now it seemed they were looking to me for a bailout. Despite my frustration, seeing Sarah's tear-stained face softened my resolve. "I'm so sorry, Sarah," I said, my voice tight with emotion, "but I don't have that kind of money. There's nothing I can do." Just then, Daniel and Ben re-entered the room, both wearing sheepish expressions. "There might be something you can do, Anya," Daniel began hesitantly, avoiding my gaze. My stomach knotted. "Like what?" I asked cautiously. Daniel swallowed, his voice tinged with desperation. "Well, your dad's pretty successful, right? Maybe you could ask him about a loan?" The suggestion felt like a manipulative ploy, but Sarah's tearful gaze was hard to ignore. With a heavy heart, I agreed to speak to my father, though I made no promises. The next day, I called my dad, apprehensive about the conversation. He listened intently as I explained the situation, his silence stretching into an agonizing eternity. Finally, he spoke. his tone grave. "All right, Anya, I'll lend you the money, but on one condition. It must be a formal loan with a signed receipt. That way, if necessary, I can reclaim the funds." Relaying this to Daniel, I saw his reluctance at the idea of a receipt, but necessity won out, and he agreed. With my father's assistance, the debt was cleared, and Sarah and Ben were effusive in their gratitude, treating me like their savior. Despite the relief of resolving the crisis, a simmering resentment lingered within me. This bitterness only deepened with the sudden, devastating loss of my father to a heart attack. The days that followed were a blur of grief, arranging the funeral amidst a stream of condolences that felt as hollow as the silence his absence left in our home. One afternoon, emotionally drained from funeral preparations, I arrived at my in-laws' house earlier than expected. The front door creaked as I entered, and a noise caught my attention. Muted voices drifted from the living room: Sarah, Ben, and Daniel. Curiosity piqued, but with a pang of guilt about eavesdropping, I hesitated near the doorway. "Can you believe it?" Ben's voice carried a chilling note of satisfaction. $350,000, and we're practically debt-free thanks to her old man. Sarah's laugh was devoid of any warmth. Stupid girl, that Anya. She never suspected a thing. My heart hammered in my chest, a mixture of shock and fury. Their words, cold and calculating, were a betrayal I hadn't seen coming. But the conversation took an even darker turn. "Can we talk about something else?" Daniel's voice was tinged with annoyance. "Living with her is killing me." "She's disgusting," Sarah interjected, amusement lacing her tone. "Something like that," Daniel agreed with a heavy sigh. "Look, I've told you, I've had someone else for a while now, someone much younger, way hotter than Anya." The room spun. Not only had they lied and manipulated me about the financial situation, but Daniel was also unfaithful. The deception was comprehensive, extending beyond money to personal betrayal. "Patience, Daniel," Ben's voice cut through, firm despite the situation. "Those damn receipts?" His voice trailed off, but the implication was clear. They were annoyed by the strings attached to the financial help. Reeling from the revelations, I stood frozen, a storm of emotions brewing inside me. The people I had trusted most had used me, and the facade of their affection had shattered irreparably. The revelation that Daniel and his parents were plotting to remove the legal proof of the loan, the receipts my father insisted on, chilled me to the bone. Daniel's next words, muttered with venomous intent, were even more alarming. "I can steal them," he snarled. "Sneak into her dad's house, get rid of them, problem solved." Despite the turmoil inside me, I knew I couldn't let on that I had overheard them. Driven by a mixture of white-hot anger and a cold resolve, I decided to act. With a deep breath, I slammed the front door shut, the sound echoing through the house as a clear signal of my return. The living room door burst open, and Sarah's face appeared, painted with feigned concern. "Oh, honey, you're back early. How did the funeral arrangements go?" Grief, both real and useful as a disguise for my inner storm, welled up in my eyes. "Going well," I choked out, my voice thick with genuine sorrow mixed with growing fury. Daniel muttered something about coming over to help clear out my dad's house, while his parents shared a sly glance, a flicker of triumph in their eyes. Little did they know the game had indeed changed. The funeral for my dad was a blur of sorrow and superficial exchanges. Back at Sarah and Ben's house afterward, the facade of sympathy quickly fell away, replaced by a chilling indifference. It started with Daniel. One moment he was awkwardly by my side, the next, he was leaning in close, his voice slow and harsh. "Get out," he spat. "Get out of this house and don't come back." My heart pounded, but I met his gaze steadily. "What do you mean?" I managed to say. "Don't play dumb, Anya." "We're done. You've served your purpose," he sneered, revealing the depth of their deceit and his betrayal. "You and your fancy daddy with his deep pockets. We don't need you anymore. Besides, I have someone else now. Younger, hotter, everything you're not." His words were a visceral blow, But before I could respond, Sarah interjected, her tone dripping with venom. Honestly, Anya, we only tolerated you because we needed your money to fix this damn house. You were so desperate to play housewife that you fell for it hook, line, and sinker. And the house? I asked, my voice tight, thinking of all I had done and sacrificed. Our house, dear. You just happened to pay for it, Sarah laughed cruelly. Speaking of paying, Daniel sneered, pulling out a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. Consider these receipts a parting gift. With a smug look, he ripped them to shreds, letting the pieces flutter to the floor, but instead of crumbling under their cruelty, a calm washed over me. A slow smile spread across my face, contrasting starkly with their shocked expressions. What's so funny? Ben growled, his voice cracking. Funny? I echoed, my voice laced with amusement and a dangerous edge. You think those were the real receipts? Their smugness flickered into doubt. Leaning in, I lowered my voice to a whisper, chilling in its clarity. Those were just copies. The originals are safely tucked away with my lawyer. The color drained from Daniel's face. Sarah's jaw dropped, and Ben looked as though he might faint. Finally, the tables had turned. I want my money back, I stated firmly, ready to reclaim not just the funds, but also my dignity and control over my life. Every penny of the $350,000 you swindled from me, and I want it by tomorrow, or I'll see you in court. Their pleas for forgiveness fell on deaf ears. I was done giving them chances. Leaving them speechless and scrambling for a solution, I turned on my heel and exited the front door, which slammed shut with a satisfying bang. The next morning, I returned to the house I had once considered a home. Ben and Sarah sat on the couch, their faces etched with practiced despair. Even Daniel, the ultimate weasel, managed a hangdog expression. Anya, Ben started, his voice dripping with false sincerity. We've been talking. I cut him off with a raised hand. Save it, Ben. I know your game. Their feigned sadness faltered, replaced by a flicker of annoyance. Sarah dabbed at non-existent tears with a lace handkerchief. Anya, honey, she cried. We were wrong. We truly are sorry. Can't we just forget all this and start over? I scoffed. Forget? Forget the way you called me disgusting. Forget the lies, the manipulation. And you, Daniel. I turned to my ex-husband, my voice laced with ice. Don't even think about pleading your case. A cheater is a cheater, and I have no interest in sharing my life with a lying scoundrel. Silence descended upon the room, thick and suffocating. Their carefully constructed facade crumbled, replaced by raw desperation. Then, an idea struck me, a solution that balanced justice with a touch of sweet satisfaction. Look, I said, leaning forward. You're broke. I have the money you stole. So here's the deal. Their eyes widened in a mixture of hope and suspicion. I outlined my plan, my voice firm and unwavering. In exchange for the stolen money, you will sign over the ownership of this house to me. A tense silence followed, broken only by Ben's ragged breathing. Finally, with a defeated sigh, he nodded. All right, Anya. We agree. A triumphant smile spread across my face. Within the hour, my lawyer, a shark in a power suit, arrived. He drafted a watertight contract, transferring the ownership of the house from Ben and Sarah to me. As they signed the final documents, their faces were a study in misery. The weight of their betrayal hung heavy in the air. I watched with satisfaction as they loaded their belongings into a beat-up pickup truck, their defeated figures shrinking into the distance. The house, once a symbol of their deceit, now stood before me as a symbol of my victory. A year passed like a runaway train. The divorce was final, a clean break that left Daniel with nothing but the clothes on his back. Good riddance. Justice, though slow, had arrived. News traveled fast in our small town, and gossip found its way to me, courtesy of Fiona and the girls during our usual Friday night wind-down. Daniel's young and hot mistress was just a bored co-worker looking for a harmless flirtation. When things got serious, she bolted faster than a scolded cat. As for his parents, they were now huddled in a dingy one-bedroom apartment, a far cry from the spacious house they tried to swindle from me. The initial sting of betrayal had dulled to a simmering ember, replaced by a fierce determination. My dad's unfinished business, his community garden project, became my focus. I poured my energy into nurturing his dream, turning grief and betrayal into a new beginning and a legacy of growth. Finding this new sense of purpose, I felt a deep connection to my father that seemed to bridge the gap his absence had created. One sunny afternoon, as I supervised a group of eager volunteers in the community garden, a familiar grating voice reached my ears. It was Alice, the head of the Homeowners Association, who had always been overly critical of my dad's project. "Anya," she drawled, her voice oozing condescension. "Such a noble cause you've taken up. But have you considered the unsightly aspects of a community garden?" I narrowed my eyes, my response firm and unwavering. "Unsightly, Alice. These are fresh vegetables, not a garbage dump, and unlike some, we're contributing to the community." Her facade of superiority quickly fell away, replaced by a visible flash of anger. But before she could snap back, a group of children burst into the scene, their faces alight with joy, their arms laden with freshly picked tomatoes. As Alice huffed and retreated in defeat, I took a moment to look around. The garden was alive with vibrant rows of vegetables, the joyful laughter of children, and the genuine camaraderie of the volunteers. My father would have been proud. A quiet smile played on my lips as I reflected on the journey. They had underestimated me, tried to break my spirit, but in their attempts, they had only become a minor detail in my larger story of resilience and growth. The garden wasn't just a tribute to my father, it was a testament to enduring, flourishing against the odds, and the power of community. Story 2. My first recollections are of a household that felt less like a normal home and more like a rigid religious organization. As the quintessential patriarch, my father dominated our little household with an iron grip, and my mother was his ardent follower, enthusiastically repeating his directives. A woman's power in this world is her capacity for listening. Dad's voice would echo off the walls as he declared. Mother disagreed, saying that your strength lies in your quiet rather than your words. Their only child was me. Remy was caught up in this complex web of limitations. No loud music, no friends over, and most definitely no opposition, in stark contrast to my parents. The air my grandma breathed was clean. She was from another universe, and she lived only a few blocks away. Her visits made our house feel lighter and more liberated. Dad sternly reprimanded her one day for trying to slip me a chocolate bar, highlighting the importance of discipline. Grandma, however, retorted strongly, "Benjamin, disciplining her is one thing, but breaking her spirit is quite another." She was never afraid to confront him, and their constant arguments formed the background noise of my childhood. Moments of warmth broke through the dismal atmosphere. Cooking, according to my mother, is the key to a happy marriage, since a guy wants a woman who can provide him with healthy food. Dad, on the other hand, taught about obedience and frequently said, "A quiet wife is a happy life," without any irony. I soon discovered that it was best to keep my thoughts to myself. I also became the invisible girl at school, hardly seeing my friends or instructors. When I turned 14, everything changed. Amid the chaos in my room, Grandma's eyes exploded with resolve and a declaration. "I'm bringing you along, Remy, so pack your luggage." Dad protested strongly, but Grandma was adamant. She said, "I won't watch you bury her spirit under your rules." After that, I was taken to my grandmother's home, a far cry from the orderly setting of my parents. With its books, music, and unceasing laughing, Grandma's house was a creative and chaotic refuge. She assured me that you would learn to communicate, to dispute, and to be yourself here. I ventured to envision a life distinct from the one I had experienced for the first time. However, old habits are hard to break. Even with her caring, the memories of my early years still hung heavy. I continued to be quiet and shy, taking comfort in the anonymity of the internet. I started using web design as a way to express myself without using words. It was like being in a different universe when I lived with Grandma. She encouraged me to speak up and take charge of my life. However, it was challenging to overcome years of conditioning. She offered to introduce me to someone, but I naturally shied away. "Next week, he'll be over for dinner," she casually said one day. I hesitated, my spoon in midair, nervous. "Why?" I was able to ask in a whisper. "Because you're a hermit at the age of 32. There was no room for argument when she firmly said, "It's time you met someone." What if, however, he is like his dad? Before I could control myself, I blurted out the question. Grandma clinked her teacup gently and set it down. The ensuing silence was filled with her sigh. "Remy, not everyone is like your dad. I've known the family of this young man for years. He is unique. I didn't believe it. What if I'm not fond of him? Then what? You dislike him as a result, but you'll give it a shot, won't you?" There was a silent plea in her eyes. I was hesitant, but I nodded. What could possibly go wrong after all? The day he was supposed to arrive, I was a mess of nerves. I changed my outfit multiple times, paced my room enough to wear down the carpet, and toyed with the idea of feigning sickness. "He's here," Grandma announced, her voice tinged with excitement. Taking a deep breath to steady my nerves, I entered the living room. There he stood, somewhat awkwardly near the doorway, holding a bouquet of flowers. He was taller than I'd expected, his eyes kind and his smile tentative. "Hi, I'm Anthony." He introduced himself, offering a handshake. "I'm Remy." I managed my voice a whisper as our hands met. Grandma, ever the gracious host, swept into the room, then brimming with charm. "Let's have dinner. Remy has made her famous lasagna." Dinner passed in a blur, mostly led by Grandma's lively chatter. Anthony spoke about his job and his hobbies, which, to my surprise, included plenty of outdoor activities. He was normal, even nice, and he listened. Truly listened when I spoke, which was a rare occurrence. After dinner, we found ourselves alone in the living room, Grandma having excused herself with a knowing wink. "So your grandma tells me you're into web design." Anthony began breaking the silence. I nodded, grateful for the familiar topic. "Yeah, I've been doing it for a few years now." "That's cool. I'm hopeless with technology myself, can barely manage my email." He chuckled, and it was an easy, infectious sound. We talked more after that about everything and nothing. He asked about my work, showed genuine interest in my passion for design, and shared humorous anecdotes about his culinary disasters. The evening was more pleasant than I'd anticipated, and for the first time, I found myself hoping it wouldn't end. After a few more dates, I realized I was falling for him, and it was a feeling like no other. A whirlwind of emotions I never experienced. Anthony was everything I never knew I needed. Then came the day he introduced me to his mother. She was polite, though her smile was strained, and her eyes scrutinized me as if I were a complex puzzle. "It's so lovely to finally meet you, Remy. Anthony has told us so much about you," she remarked, her voice lovely but laced with something I couldn't describe. "Thank you, Mrs. Margaret. It's great to meet you too," I said, aiming for civility. Our wedding was simple, just as we intended. However, coming into Anthony's family house produced a sense of déjà vu that unsettled me. It seemed like stepping back into the severe discipline of my upbringing. Mrs. Margaret wasted no time in laying down the law, her demands as lofty and immovable as skyscrapers. The first morning in their house, I awakened to find her already at the kitchen table, ruling over the morning like a queen holding court. "Good morning," I muttered, still drowsy. "Morning, sweetheart. Now listen, we have a way of doing things around here. You'll start by taking over the cooking tasks. Breakfast at 6, dinner is at 7, and lunch is at 12. I also anticipate that the house will be immaculate." There was no space for discussion in her tone as she asserted. As I agreed and wondered how I would handle this new chapter with the memories of my past still so evident, the same weight of expectations descended upon me once more. A knot formed in my throat as I obeyed her order. At that moment, Anthony walked across the kitchen and kissed my cheek. "Thank you, sweetie. Mom is an excellent educator. You'll learn a lot from her," he said casually, as though he were recommending a harmless habit over my everyday struggle. I started my mornings in the gloomy pre-dawn light, trying to put together a meal that would at least somewhat meet her high expectations. I hurried to finish off my web design assignments after the morning's gastronomic challenge. My professional obligations are entwined with a never-ending cycle of household activities. Evenings were spent preparing dinner for Anthony, who came home with his own expectations. Mrs. Margaret confined herself to supervising my work, giving regular and incisive criticism, pointing out any dust that had been missed or a dish that had not been well cleaned. She had never heard of compliments before. Her words were critical, each one more scathing than the previous. Things got much worse when it was revealed that I made money designing websites. My money was suddenly thrown into the family pot. "Remy, you are now a member of this family. It is reasonable for you to help out around the house," Anthony said as he held out his hand, anticipating my bank card. "I already make a contribution. I clean and cook," I objected, but he cut me off contemptuously. "Yes, but money isn't the same. It is for the family. For us." There was no place for rebuttals in his voice, and my profits were sent to his account right away. I no longer owned the money I made from working long hours managing picky clients and creating websites. See the sharp difference between this new reliance and my financial independence? Not at me. Even though I had a good living, I had to beg for money to pay for necessities. For tomorrow's market, I need some cash. I would say that I heeded the suggestion timidly at every time. To what extent would he ask? His tone was laced with suspicion, as though I were preparing a complex escape. "Just enough for a few housekeeping products and food this week," I would respond, trying to speak steadily. He would give me a small sum of money, never enough, so I would have to ask again, which was a strategy to keep me reliant and under control. On my wedding day, I had not imagined this existence. My wages supported a home that had little regard for me, and I was ensnared in an unending cycle of slavery. Under the careful eye of a husband who supported her at every turn, and a mother-in-law who treated me more like hired family and health. The day the spaghetti overcooked was the final straw after months of this unrelenting cycle. Margaret's harsh criticism arrived quickly. "You refer to this as supper." As I stood there, I felt less like a wife and more like a reprimanded child. "Apologies. It simply slipped my mind," I whispered. "Escaped from you." As though I had spoken the most ridiculous thing, she snorted. Anthony mimicked her contempt. "You haven't been at your best, Remy. What's happening?" It hurt to hear what they said. I was reprimanded for a little error while trying to fit web design into whatever time I had left. "I'm doing my hardest." Even though it seemed like I was talking to a brick wall, I persisted. "Best." Anthony's laugh was brief and contemptuous. I discovered that the overcooked spaghetti wasn't the only issue that evening. It has to do with me, about how my frantic efforts to win their approval were causing me to lose myself. My heart spilled into a web design forum as my fingers slid across the keyboard while I sat at my computer. A location that was now my confessional. Expressing my annoyance was like letting out a breath I was unaware I'd been holding for a fellow forum member. Jess gave me a response that made me stop dead in my tracks. "Remy, this seems like psychological torture. Have you ever done any research on it?" Psychological mistreatment. The phrase kept coming back to me late into the night as I read through articles and anecdotes, each of which reflected aspects of my own life and eerily similar patterns. When my grandmother called in the morning, I lacked the courage to reveal the depth of my difficulties. I told her that I was only going through a little difficult moment, minimizing the internal conflict. "You can tell me anything, don't you?" Over the distance, Grandma's voice conveyed her worry. "I know, Grandmother. I'm simply getting some things straightened up." I lied, nothing serious. My conscience is burdened with shame over my deceit. The idea of her worrying about me was too much for me. I delved deeper into the research of psychological abuse after our chat, keeping the materials hidden from Anthony's mother. Every page I read was like adding a new piece to the puzzle of my warped reality, exposing more aspects of the control and manipulation that were holding me captive. I didn't share anything I had learned, especially with Grandma. The state of affairs had grown so bad that I didn't want to burden her. Then, however, everything was different. I was surprised by a car one day while I was out getting groceries, a quick escape from the stuffy environment at home. The effect was complete and instantaneous. Everything turned dark. I woke up in the hospital, covered in casts and bandages, feeling afraid and confused yet glad to be alive. When Anthony and his mother stormed into my hospital room, that relief was gone. Their expressions were twisted, not with worry, but with rage. "Fantastic. Fantastic. This has forced me to prepare meals for myself. What were you contemplating? Anthony's voice sounded like a poisonous growl. And I have to tidy up. You would best not spend a lot of time lounging here. As chilly as ever, his mother contributed her purported concern. I gazed at them, feeling both anguish and incredulity. A vehicle struck me. I'm fractured. I can't just stand up. With you, an excuse is always an excuse. Anthony cut in sharply. When are you going to take responsibility again and quit acting like you don't? Even though their cruelty was almost unbearable, something inside of me that had grown stronger during the previous weeks of covert study and mute acceptance of my circumstances would not crumble. At that time, the doctor came in, his face purely businesslike. Anthony made a demand. When will she be able to walk again? We have a home to manage. After looking at my record, the doctor turned back to them. She needs to relax for at least 3 months. We will then discuss rehabilitation. It won't happen quickly. You could practically feel their wrath. 3 months. Who will foot the bill for all of this? It was almost funny how Anthony pretended to be worried. He turned to face me, his words piercing. You are misguided if you believe that you will take it easy at our cost. Cleaning and cooking were completed if you won't be returning in a month. At that moment, a voice I could hardly recognize as my own answered, and a wonderful clarity solidified inside me. Then we're finished. I'd like a divorce. Deathly silence descended upon the room. His mother appeared to have bitten into a bitter lemon, and Anthony's face was devoid of color. Her skull must have been struck too forcefully. She spoke softly to her kid. Her voice was tainted by disbelief. As dramatic as their appearance, they disappeared shortly after, leaving me alone with my thoughts and a sensation of liberation. The process of recovery was going to be difficult, but for the first time in a long time, I was willing to go through it on my own terms. I was pleasantly surprised by the gifts my tragedy had given me. Clarity and a strategy. Anthony expected me to have a breakdown when he came to the hospital with the divorce papers in hand and a smug assurance on his face. An entreaty for him to stay. Rather, with a calm determination, using my intact right hand, I picked up the pen and wrote my name with a steadiness that surprised even me. He left my laptop and possessions by the bed and sneered with overconfident arrogance, "You'll be back." A final token of his dismissal. However, I experienced a wave of liberation rather than abandonment. In the weeks that followed, I was at last free. I went back to my grandma's house. She embraced me when I returned. No inquiries were made, no conclusions were drawn. I was able to rediscover strengths I was unaware I had thanks to her support. However, the tranquility did not last long. As if they had any right to encroach on my life once more, Anthony and his mother soon showed up at Grandma's door with legal documents in hand and demands for answers. You can't just bring a lawsuit. Anthony's voice was a mixture of fear and rage. For what reasons? I retorted in a cool but forceful tone. First of all, psychological torture, and stealing my money without my permission. Anthony, I have recordings. Everything. The color went from his cheeks when I said it plainly. Recordings. Please, Remy. You're not understanding. I might be ruined by this. He stumbled, fear spreading. His mother joined in, tears running down her cheeks. Please. We had no malicious intent. You must pardon us. Seeing them so scared and needy was nearly unreal. They had devalued me and made me feel helpless for months. However, the roles were now inverted. No, with an unwavering voice, I declared, I want to permanently cut you two out of my life. When they were retreating, Grandma gazed at me with joy and wonder. She remarked, I never knew you had it in you. Grandma, I confessed that I didn't either. Now, though, I do. I was experiencing a range of emotions after sending Anthony and his mother go. But more than anything, there was a sense of victory. I had stood up to them and repelled their dishonesty and hatred. The court date was approaching. However, I was prepared, equipped with indisputable proof and a renewed determination. The courtroom looked intimidating. With its lofty ceilings, every mutter and footstep is amplified. With his mother at his side, Anthony seemed much less assured. As the proceedings started, her normally stern manner seemed to melt into dread. Our case was presented in detail by my counsel, a witty and straightforward woman. In an effort to downplay the evidence, Anthony's attorney portrayed him as a confused spouse who had been falsely charged. When I had a chance to talk, I stood in front of Anthony, the judge, and everyone else in the room. I spoke clearly and steadily. Your Honor, it became a jail, even though I felt I was living in a loving environment. The control over my cash and the psychological torment. I have evidence of it all, I said. Anthony's attorney cut him off. These charges, Your Honor, are overblown. My client's intentions have always been the greatest. I couldn't help but laugh. Having the best of intentions doesn't mean surreptitiously recording conversations and taking over someone's entire life. The room was quieted by the judge. Examined the supporting data. I supplied the communications, bank statements, and recordings, and he glanced up after what seemed like an eternity of waiting. This court can see that Mrs. Margaret has been subjected to severe psychological abuse by Mr. Margaret and his mother. The proof is strong and completely backs up her assertions. The verdict was overwhelmingly in my favor. The vindication was significant in addition to the divorce being granted. It was more than just a court win. My life and my voice were being reclaimed. Anthony and his mother had to return me for every dime they had collected, for me standing outside the courtroom, and pay damages once the court decided in my favor. Grandma gave me a firm hug. I'm very proud of you, she said quietly. I experienced a sense of relief, as though I could at last begin over. As is often the case in both big cities and small communities, word of the court's ruling circulated swiftly. Anthony quickly lost his reputation and was shunned by the community. Due to the unwanted attention, his managers demoted him, and one by one, his clients vanished, keen to avoid a guy who was now notorious for abusing his wife. His mother, who had formerly been a powerful figure in her social circles, was left to live in her anger with a son, whose life she had helped upend as friends and acquaintances withdrew. Before moving or looking for a new apartment by the sea, I was resolved to confront the ghosts of my past head-on as I started this new chapter. I ended myself in Dr. Micah's office, a psychologist. I never would have thought to take that step. However, there I was, ready to face the challenges of my life. Dr. Micah's office was a peaceful haven with lots of plants and literature. Through the windows, sunlight streams in. What has been happening then? During our first session, she inquired. She spoke in a direct, yet compassionate manner. I let out a mixture of anxiety and relief, thankful to have finally spoken to someone who could help me navigate the confusion. I've dedicated my entire life to winning people over, being silent, being the good girl. Next came my marriage. I admitted that it was much worse, but more of the same. Micah told me, "Doctor, we'll take it one step at a time." Her tone was firm and reassuring. My sanctuary was created during those sessions with Dr. Micah, when I was able to face my history and my anxieties and start the healing process. It was difficult, to be sure, but it was vital. For the first time, I felt like I was taking back control of my story gradually. I was talking to my grandmother about my future ambitions over breakfast one clear morning. The maps and pamphlets arranged on the table were bathed in a warm glow as sunlight streamed in through the kitchen window. "So, where should I start?" Grandma questioned, joy and a trace of mischief glimmering in her eyes. My thoughts are on the coast. Living close to the water has always been my dream. As I put jam on my toast, I pondered. A new beginning, new landscape, sounds beautiful, and labor. Returning to the topic of site design, as she sipped her tea, she asked. I gave a nod. Yes, but this time on my terms. Independent contractor, perhaps learn a few new talents in the process. Who knows? There are no limits. Grandma laughed. Just don't skydive on me, please. It's too much for my heart. No assurances. I gave him a friendly whack with a napkin for my teasing. The casual conversation, the laughing. It was restorative. The ensuing weeks were packed with activities. Packing. I was getting ready to relocate and said goodbye to the few friends I had established. The excitement of a fresh start was exhilarating, but leaving the security of Grandma's house was bittersweet. I went to the seaside that day. At the entrance, Grandma gave me a firm embrace. Keep in mind that you are stronger than you realize. You're never alone either. As I embarked on my new journey, her remarks served as a reassuring reminder. As I said Grandma farewell with a tearful voice, I vowed to remember. I appreciate all you've done. I fought the need to turn around as I drove away. With all of its twists and turns, the road ahead seemed to hold the promise of fresh experiences and tales. Arriving in my new seaside town seemed like a breath of fresh air. The sea turned into a reliable friend. With the steady cadence of the waves, its roars and murmurs soothed my spirit. I discovered a charming studio apartment with a captivating outlook that was situated only near the ocean. It wasn't easy for my tiny piece of paradise to start over. Forming a new pattern, it took initiative to get a job and make acquaintances. However, I felt as though I was living for myself for the first time in what seemed like an eternity. I made every choice with the intention of making my life happier. I threw myself into the freelance web design industry, using my abilities to forge a career of my own. Study was only one aspect of the work. It was enlightening. I started working with clients that appreciated my opinions as well as my knowledge. The days when I felt devalued and undervalued were very different from this current work setting. Every assignment I finished increased my sense of success and self-worth a little bit, and I was now not just recognized, but also valued. Story 3. My name is Bella Smith, and I grew up surrounded by the aroma of fresh timber and the sounds of carpentry. My mother, Angela, supported my father, Henry Smith, in his creative pursuits by running the family company, which focused on making handcrafted furniture. She frequently worked from her home office, carefully managing the money and customer correspondence, while reassuring our clients that fine workmanship takes time. My grandfather's painting watched over me as I grew up, serving as a continuous reminder of the heritage of our family. I learned the value of maintaining this legacy from my father, who frequently talked about how his father and his father before him had started the company from the bottom up. However, I was more focused on school and friends when I was younger. As I became older, I started to feel this sense of duty more strongly when I was in my 20s. My involvement in the family company had increased, gaining experience in the workshop over the course of several summers. Even though I had own goals of maybe going into law or medicine, I felt a stronger bond with my family's trade. However, I noticed a change at home about the time I was 24 years old and graduated from college. My mother had changed from her normal cheerful disposition to one of anxiety, and my father appeared unusually busy, spending more time in his office. One evening, while we were making supper, I approached my mother because I could no longer ignore the uncomfortable atmosphere. She grudgingly admitted that the opening of a new, less expensive furniture manufacturing in our neighborhood was seriously hurting our company. It was disturbing to learn that the legacy that the Smiths had fought so hard to establish was in jeopardy. I was lounging in the living room a few days later when my father summoned me urgently to a study. I entered and was greeted by Mr. Lincoln Lopez, a severe guy who appeared to examine me closely before giving me a quick nod. It was evident that important decisions were being taken in the stressful atmosphere, even though I was fired before fully comprehending the situation. In the days that followed, it was clear that our family was about to undergo significant changes because of the hushed anxieties and sudden silences that pervaded the atmosphere at home. I had the unshakable impression that our tradition and way of life were going to face serious challenges. The tension was nearly palpable when I entered the room that night. My parents thought it was time to have a serious talk on a dreary Tuesday. My mother fidgeted nervously, and my father's face was somber as we gathered in the living room. My dad's voice seemed abnormally unsteady when he spoke. "Stella, we have to talk about something crucial." I stiffened, picturing all kinds of horrible things. He inhaled deeply. "Do you recall the other day's Mr. Lopez? He is the owner of the huge furniture manufacturer I just described." Remembering the plant that threatened our family company made my stomach drop. As she nodded in agreement, my mother's eyes were sorrowful. "Indeed, my dear. He's been trying to edge out in the market with a lot of aggression, but I'm leaning in since there's more sweetness added." My heart was pounding with anxiety. There was a long pause, and then he went on. "He's made a strange proposition. I prepared myself for the following step. He wants to set you and his son up for marriage. I thought I had misunderstood, and I was so surprised that I almost laughed. I apologize. What? I was shocked to hear such remarks. My mother stepped in right away. I realize it sounds extreme. We won't put any pressure on you, dear. We simply felt you ought to be aware. I sprang to my feet, my head whirling. This is crazy. The 21st century is upon us. Marriages are no longer arranged. The expression on my father's face was one of worry and remorse. Bella, I understand. But our company's future, the legacy of your granddad, everything is on the line. I paced in an attempt to process this startling information. I'm meant to wed a man in order to keep our family company afloat? It's medieval. I stopped and faced them. My parents, always supportive of my dreams and independence, now seemed absolutely dejected and forlorn. I need some time. Finally, I said. My declaration weighed heavily on the room. It's a lot to process. I struggled with the suggestion over the course of the next week. Another part of me that was strongly tied to our family's history felt indignant at the idea. Thought about it. I finally made the decision to meet Mr. Lopez's kid after considerable introspection. Simply meet him. No pledges, no obligations, I reminded myself. I went inside the fancy cafe where we had agreed to meet. My heart was racing. I searched the area for someone who may be him. A voice shouted out, "Bella!" I turned to find a man with a warm grin and brown hair that was unkempt, approximately my age. David Lopez is my name. He gave his name. Not at all the formal, rigid figure I had envisioned. He winked and flourished as he pulled out my chair. "This is quite strange," he said nonchalantly. I let out a real chuckle, which relieved the stress. As we conversed over coffee, you could reiterate that. I discovered that I was actually enjoying the discussion. David was pleasant, humorous, and surprisingly grounded. He even voiced his disapproval of his father's traditional methods. I was shocked to discover that I didn't want our informal encounter to stop when it developed into hours of pleasant discussion. David and I started seeing one other more frequently over the course of the following several weeks. We spent leisurely days in the park, tried out different eateries, and went to the movies. It was surprisingly pleasant. You know, I think our parents might have been onto something after all, David mused reflectively one evening as we strolled by the river. Taking a moment, he said, "I think I might be falling in love with you." When I recognized that I felt the same, my heart leaped and I experienced a wave of surprise and happiness. Perhaps, just possibly, this impromptu arrangement could become something truly amazing. I became aware that I was falling for David as he revealed his developing feelings for me. Our parents, who were very happy about this development, regarded it as a way to alleviate the difficulties that both families were under due to their businesses. I could see how relieved my father was when we announced our engagement a few months later. At our wedding celebration, David's father, Mr. Lopez, took me away, looking almost triumphantly satisfied. His voice was low and sincere, and his manner was solemn. Although Bella David is a decent person, he requires guidance. He must develop into a responsible adult. It's up to you to lead him. Are you able to accomplish that? I was surprised by his straightforward request, but I still vowed to try my hardest. Yes, the first few years of our marriage were a blur. I urged David to get more involved in the business world, as I had promised Mr. Lopez. He gradually started to put his carefree college days behind him and assumed greater responsibility at work. Mr. Lopez used to say, "You're a miracle worker," evidently happy with David's change. Not everyone, though, had a favorable opinion of these modifications. Sienna, David's mother, always appeared to watch me with a mixture of disdain and distrust. She hardly concealed her emotions with her tight-lipped smiles and curtain nods. In the meantime, our family business was doing quite well. Within a year, my father's business steadied and even increased its turnover, which gave him great comfort and pleasure. Nevertheless, I became restless. I told David one night that I was thinking about finding a job. It was unexpected when his fork struck the platter. "A job? Why is our predicament insufficient?" Incredulously, he inquired. I clarified that I wanted to use my knowledge and make a contribution, but he rejected the concept and recommended that I work in charity instead. As ladies in our social group were accustomed to doing, I used my problems as motivation to start the Smith-Lopez Foundation, which supports kids with developmental disabilities. Although it wasn't the professional route I had originally intended for myself, it gave me a feeling of direction. My life became a series of social responsibilities and charity galas throughout the course of the following 10 years. David's father unexpectedly died, leaving him to inherit the business and take over as CEO right away. Another bombshell arrived 3 years later. Sienna's cancer was found to be advanced. During a Sunday supper, she disclosed her illness. Her hand shook, but her voice remained firm. She steadfastly refused to leave her house, even though David's first suggestion was to put her in a specialist care facility. I intervened and proposed a middle ground. Sienna, we will set you up with the greatest in-home care. The best nurses and oncologists, whatever you require. I was shocked to see a rare display of warmth from Sienna. Her cold attitude toward me softened as she patted my hand and expressed gratitude as I committed to Sienna's care throughout the ensuing years. She gave me an honest look and remarked, "You're a good woman, Bella," one day while I was rearranging her pillows. I apologize for not seeing it sooner. As our bond deepened, David's distance from me increased. He began to revert to his old behaviors after being released from his father's strict supervision. He missed crucial meetings, and his late hours at work became nights spent at bars. He arrived home one evening with a defeated expression on his face and a whiskey odor. "The business has gone bankrupt," he said. "Everything is gone." The speed at which things had degenerated entirely surprised me. "How will we proceed?" In desperation, I begged David. It was a scathing and cynical answer. "If I realize I'm not cut out for this business bullshit, I'll be damned." I set aside my pride and contacted my father in an attempt to make things better. "I need a favor, Dad." I got started right away. David received an offer from Dad to work as his assistant. I had a sneaking sensation that our troubles were only getting started, but David grudgingly accepted it. Following David's tenure, the months that followed were a complete bust. As revenues crashed and my father's once thriving business began to deteriorate, I watched in horror. I couldn't stand by and watch any longer, so one evening I went up to David in our living room. "What's the matter with you?" I insisted. "I'm frustrated. Your lifeline was meant to be this work, but you're acting as though it's a bother." Once more, David's chuckle was bitter. "A lifeline. Please, all I'm doing is battling for time so I can leave." His coldness astounded me. "What are you saying?" He gave a chilling response. "I'll sell everything after my mother dies. After that, I'm heading out." Something struck me in the stomach. "How come you're so icy? She is your mom." You could feel his contempt. "She is a burden," he shot back, "and I'm beneath this job. I wasn't an errand boy. I was a CEO. I became enraged. The ungrateful jerk you are. When you were at your lowest, my father offered you a chance, and you return his benevolence in this way. You've been wallowing in your own misery while I've been here handling everything." I bounded from the room, enraged. I ran into Sienna in the corridor, and she looked like she had heard everything. We simply exchanged glances for a time before she extended her hand and grasped mine. Although silent, her touch was encouraging. I fought back tears as I gripped her hand back. My world fell apart one gloomy Tuesday morning after weeks of tense anxiety. I was told by a policeman that my parents had perished in an automobile accident. I felt numb, like a ghost going through the funeral preparations. Overwhelmed by grief, David stayed cold through it all. Not even a word of assistance. He didn't go to the funeral at all. I felt a wave of anguish and rage as I saw the caskets of my parents being lowered. I contacted our corporate secretary once I got out of the cemetery. I inquired whether David was in the office. A pause occurred. "Indeed," she said quietly. "He's in your father's office." Her voice was sorrowful, angry, and still dressed for my funeral. I rushed into my father's office after driving directly to the firm. I discovered David casually seated himself with his feet on the desk in my father's chair. "Do you believe you're accomplishing something? Now get out of my dad's chair," I shouted. His contemptuous reaction just made me more enraged. "The chair of your father? Trying to reason with him, he said smugly, "I think you mean my chair." "Please, David," I begged. "This is incorrect. My dad passed just recently." I was silenced as he pounded his fist on the desk. Enough. I was tired of being manipulated by David. "Fella, I'm done listening to your moral lectures. Your persistent pestering and advancements have made my life a living hell." He sneered as he said it. I was surprised. "What are you discussing?" He simply growled back at what I managed to say. "I heard you. Since the day we were married, you have been attempting to alter who I am." Surprise. "You were never loved by me. The only reason I married you was because my father forced me to." His harsh remarks really got to me, and reeling from the impact, I stumbled back. David's face took on a crafty look. "Oh, and this may be of interest to you. I am currently the deputy director of this firm, which is worth around $42 million. I muttered incredulously. "That is not possible." He raised an eyebrow and grinned. "Can't I? I have complete control over account access and passwords. Bella, I'm in command now. Furthermore, there is nothing you can do." He started moving business monies to personal account on the computer, which horrified me. "Quit!" I shouted and hurried to stop him, but he pushed me away. "The door is there if you don't like it." Then he threw me a folder. The documents were divorce paperwork. "It's your decision," he added icily. I automatically grabbed the folder. The shock is making my head spin. However, I knew I had to go silently after glancing at David, the stranger who had taken my husband's place. I drove straight to the office of Mr. Asher, my father's attorney and personal confidant, after leaving the workplace. His eyes were serious as he welcomed me. He handed me an envelope and stated, "Your father expected something like this might happen." It held a letter with shaking hands and my father's will. I read it. I'm crying uncontrollably. 3 weeks before to my father's passing, David had been formally fired, and the company was mine. It was a devastating letter. "If you're reading this, Bella, my love, I'm not here anymore. I regret not recognizing David for who he really was and forcing you into this marriage. You are so deserving of better. You now own the business. Restore its health. Divorce that useless man, please. Be content and live your life. All I ever wanted for you was that. Dad, you have my undying affection, powerful and resolute." Mr. Asher caught my attention. "Kindly submit these divorce documents right away," I gave instructions, heavy-hearted but resolute. I went back to the home that didn't seem like home. It appeared drier and cooler inside. In the living room, I discovered Sienna, wrapped in a blanket and looking weak. "Sienna." I started off slowly. "I have something to tell you. David and I are divorcing each other. I'm going." I was surprised. Her eyes welled with tears. "Bella, take me with you, please," she begged, moved by her request, yet stunned. I was on the verge of agreeing. David's face twisted as he rushed in anger when the front door flew open. He yelled at me, "You! What did you do? The business accounts have been banned. Nothing is accessible to me." I remained steadfast, confronting him with renewed fortitude. "David, the business isn't yours. I signed the divorce papers, and my father left it to me. Our marriage has ended. Nothing here is yours to claim." His eyes shifted to Sienna, who was silently assembling a little bag, while David's face became a deep scarlet. "Mom, what are you doing?" he made a demand. Sienna looked at him steadily and calmly. "Bella is going with me." She paused before declaring. David was in too much astonishment to answer. He was gradually coming to terms with his new circumstances. David became enraged and began insulting Sienna. "You hateful scum," he shouted, "following everything that I have done for you." He was relentless even if his remarks hurt. "All right. Leave now. You two. Both of you are better off without me." We then departed, relocating to my childhood home. Taking over the business was a huge task. In an effort to uphold my father's tradition, I sat up late every night to go over financial records. My father's reliable secretary, Daisy, joined me as my assistant. Her in-depth knowledge of how the business operated was quite helpful. I gradually took back control, and business started to grow once more. We even extended our foundation's charity endeavors. After 3 years, Sienna's health started to deteriorate dramatically. To take care of her, and make sure her final days were as comfortable as possible. I cut back on my job hours. I held her hand as she died quietly, one calm fall morning. I was really appreciative of the time we had spent together. To commemorate her, I planned a lovely funeral, without cutting any corners. As expected, David did not show up. The Lopez family notary, Mr. John, called me a few weeks after Sienna's death to invite me to the reading of Sienna as well. My heart skipped a beat as I got to the notary's office. David was there with a young woman on his arm, looking as cocky as ever. He gave me a smirk. He scoffed, "Well, if it's not the mourning widow." "Do not be concerned, it will not take long. I'm going to use my mother's money to give my beautiful Georgia a well-earned vacation." I chose to sit aside from them, ignoring his jests. Silencing the room, Mr. John started the reading as the notary went through the well. David grinned more broadly, but the tension was broken by a statement. "Being of sound mind, I, Sienna Lopez, now give Bella Smith all of my possessions, including my home and funds." There was silence in the room. David's expression fell as Mr. John went on. "I hope Bella makes use of these resources to help the non-profit organization that she so fervently supports for kids with developmental issues." My eyes filled with tears. Sienna was demonstrating her love and support, even in death. David burst out once again. "This is absurd. My mother must have been manipulated by her." "Bella, you're a phony. You are taking my inheritance after ruining my life." His partner appeared confused. "Hold on. Do you imply that you have no money?" David's cries were ignored as she collected her possessions. "I can explain, Georgia, darling. But she was on her way." David redirected his rage toward me. "Bella, you'll pay for this. I shall challenge the will." Calmly, Mr. John broke the silence. "Mr. Lopez, I'm afraid it won't be feasible. The will of your mother is unchangeable. I saw that she was in good mental health when she made these choices." Defeated. David left the workplace a devastated man after his determination broke down. He locked the door behind him. I exhaled. I was holding without realizing it. A wave of victory swept over me. It was because justice had been done, not because of the inheritance. Verifying Sienna's belief in me and our common principles. Every time I thought about it, I was struck by how strong Sienna's faith in me had remained till the very end. I said in an emotional voice, "Mr. John, I want to quickly establish a trust for the foundation." Sienna would have approved of it. In the months that followed, under my direction, I threw myself fully into the business and the foundation. In addition to regaining its previous level of prosperity, my father's company reached unprecedented heights. In the meantime, the nonprofit organization grew considerably, reaching more kids and having a greater influence than previously. I used to sit in the office that had belonged to my father and was now mine every evening, and I would take a moment to gaze at the pictures on my desk. There were photos of Sienna and my parents, their expressions brimming with joy. She had a fun, mischievous sparkle in her eyes. Even if they were gone from me, I was still being shaped by their love and support. In addition to these pictures, I retained a framed quotation that had come to represent my philosophy. I took it up and read the well-known words, which each time struck a deeper chord. "The most stunning places are frequently reached by the most challenging routes." This slogan served as a reminder of the path I had taken, full of obstacles and tribulations, but ultimately leading to a place of deep contentment and meaning. Every statement strengthened my resolve to carry on their legacy, paying tribute to them in every choice I made and in every kid we assisted via the foundation.